Hi, everybody. Welcome to LearnUp Center's Wednesday webinars. My name is Steve Hagler. I'm the Executive Director of LearnUp Centers. We're happy to have Steve Tattum here, our Reading Director. I want to tell you a little bit about LearnUp Centers. We are a nonprofit reading clinic. We're based in San Francisco, but these days everything is online. In the last couple of weeks, we've taken all of our one-on-one tutoring and put it online. So we're working with kids in a remote distance setting. It's actually going quite well, and we're really pleased with the change and the pivot. LearnUp Centers is working primarily with kids who are struggling to read. We work with kids with dyslexia and with kids of all ages. We also offer trainings, and Steve will bring up some of the trainings we have coming up. And we're really excited to share our methodologies and our approaches to reading with you. I want to introduce Steve. Steve Tattum is our reading director. He's also the founder of the Tattum reading system. He's a dyslexia expert. Has been teaching kids with reading issues to read for over 40 years. Steve is a remarkable talent, and we're really happy to have him with us today. Steve, you ready to take it away?
Sure. Okay. So as soon as you take that away, I can share the screen.
There you go.
Great. Okay. Well, just a little background on who I am so you understand I do have some background in this field. I was a program director at Denver Academy, a school for kids with learning problems, for a little over 35 years. And my job was to learn a little bit about everything on LD, from teaching content courses, reading, math, etc. But in reading, I taught three types of groups. I taught systematic phonics to our kids who had phonics problems. I taught directed reading for kids who now could read but needed to work 6 syllables and needed to learn more about text. And then I taught whole language for kids who could read. The goal was to turn them on. So I have a view of reading that's way beyond phonics. Though the problem kids I had quite often had systematic phonics, and that's where I ended up putting a lot of my energies. So a lot of what I'll be talking to is looking at reading from a holistic perspective. I also did dropout prevention for over 20 years. And I presently work with a dropout prevention program called Beyond Basics. They're an inner city remedial program for reading in Detroit. And my program has been adopted by Detroit High School to work with all the students who are below reading level at the high school level age. We started this year, but of course have a pause right now. Presently, I work at Stern School in the morning with kids with dyslexia, and then I run the reading clinic along with Steve in the afternoon. This presentation will be about fluency, which I'm referred to as accuracy, speed, intonation while reading, and comprehension. It's a little bit of all. Now, right from the get-go, there's no standard for fluency, because fluency is going to be directly related to students' processing, and students' processing varies. So I have some kids who can get up to 350 words a minute, 270, they're in 7th, 8th grade. And I have other kids that have severe dyslexia who get up to 80 words a minute, but are very accurate, okay? So we'll be talking about that variation. We'll also be aware that there's 3 types of reading. There's eye reading, which is what we'll be talking about, ear reading, which is listening to books, and also touch reading, Braille. And for kids that have fluency issues, ear reading is an important component to have along with their eye reading approach. And we'll touch on that. Okay. Now, from the get-go, my whole program is based on starts. And the starts are, we do a quick test, which we'll be talking about next week. Next week will be diagnosis. And it's a half-hour testing I do, where I determine if a child has dyslexic tendencies or has developmental reading tendencies. And there's a big difference, or has comprehension issues. And it's one that we use to get the starts. And so that'll be next week's workshop. But if I have a child at start 1, they're a non-reader. And of course, fluency there is just getting them to decode. Start 2 is a one-syllable reader. And again, we're working on speed of decoding. Then we have the emerging reader, Start 3. And Start 3 is now working with two-syllable words. And we're now starting to pick up a little pace. Start 4 is the developing reader. This is a child who's been through some phonics programs and has gaps, can read, but it isn't fluid. And Start 5 is a child who basically doesn't have phonics problems, but has trouble in comprehension and fluency. We discussed this last week, and we'll always look at it because the starts are crucial. My approach with Start 1s and 2s are going to be a little different than with my 3s and 4s. But we'll be talking about that whole sequence. Okay? This, again, the starts I'll be discussing next week how I get that in a pretty quick way. And how it's just very practical. Okay. Now, let's go to Steve, can you see the board?
No, you need to click down.
Okay.
Hope you just lost it.
I know, I'm just checking. Now you can see the board, correct?
Yes.
All right, this is the code that I use. Basically, I simplified the code because reading is not exact word attack. It's approximation with context. So really good word attack is the ability to sound out words, to stay in tune with what you're reading, and use good word attack with the context of that sentence structure. So one of the aspects is making a child as quick and as fluent with word attack as possible. That's the start of all fluency. So if a child can read restitution very quickly, break down it in syllables, that's the real basis of the beginning of fluency. However, here is the issue that students have, and I can pick this up in that half-hour testing I'll talk about next week. And the whole issue on fluency basically depends on the fusiform gyrus. Okay, the fusiform gyrus is right behind the left ear, at the bottom of the left ear where the temporal lobe touches the occipital lobe. I will be showing that later. And that's called the word form area. And historically, it was used more to recognize animals and other things, but is now been used, taken over by the word form area. And it has to be developed. Now, some kids, that fires early up in kindergarten. And when they sound out a word 3 or 4 times, they remember it. And those are the kids that get fluent real quick. And any technique you use for fluency is going to work pretty much with kids like this. And I'll have kids like that come to my clinic who can't read, but their word form area is firing, and we'll raise 4 or 5 grade levels in 2-3 months, and speed will get up to grade level because in reality, they don't have a problem. Their problem is they just weren't taught systematic phonics. So those are kids who will make really speedy development. Then you have the child who is often labeled dyslexia or auditory perception problem or auditory sequencing, and this is a child who has auditory processing problems and isn't stimulating that word form area. I have one child that had to look at the word the 350 times and still would call it then. And we were doing kinesthetic, drawing, you name it. The severest word form area child I've ever seen. So we'll be talking about how to stimulate that word form area, because that is the game when you got kids with severe dyslexia, is to stimulate that word form area. Okay, so a few of the things I will do, I don't do flashcards for sounds. I start by saying the sounds and the kids will echo and point, and I'll hit the high frequency sounds. So I'll be going ch, and the child will be going ch, and later on they'll be going ch, ch. These are other spellings. R, and they'll be going r, and k, they'll be going k, and oi, they'll be going oi, and they'll be quickly pointing the sounds. Then I'll rapidly point the letters and they'll say the sound. So I'm working on speed there. Then I will do rapid segmenting and blending, like pull out the word quip, nonsense word, quip, make it quep, quip, and the child will go quep. Good. Make it quem, quip, quem. Now this is phonemic awareness, okay? applied to phonics. I do not do phonemic awareness separate from phonics. I do it within the phonics. Now, for high school kids, they found that advanced phonemic awareness is what you must couple with phonics. And that looks like this. Quem, make it quim. They say the word and they make a change. Shim, shim. Shiz, shiz. Shez, shez. Shoys, shoys. This is advanced phonemic awareness, where you're manipulating sounds all over very quickly. Okay, so we do that, and then we show the words and kids read it. This is shall. This would be quow. Quows. This would be quauk. Okay, so we work on this for reading. Then I go to lists that I have. Okay. Do you see the list, Steve?
No, not yet.
You don't, okay. Okay, now you do.
Okay.
Okay, so these are lists. So if a child's on closed syllables, we'll time them. And they'll go ras, liz, dex, yap, riv, kicks, reg, lib, hex, nil. Beat your time. Ras, liz, dex, yap, rib, kicks, reg, lib, hex, rail, nil. Beat your time. Okay, whatever concept, if I'm on Teams or silent letters, I'll be doing this. Now, if we're further along, let's say I'm at open, close, silent E, we will have them go back and do one word from each column, like raz, nep, quip, muck, ris, sot, nick, sump, thing, chise, quipe, metip, meteep, sit, plebe, and then we will do that column and time them on the column. In other words, we are trying to make phonetic and syllable knowledge quick and automatic. This is from the Reading League, feels that fluency is really dependent on speed of word attack, which I believe is the starting point, especially for my start ones and twos, that they're very quick on word attack, okay? So that, all phonics programs work for that, and that is the starting point. If a child runs into this word and has to think, okay, is that kanan, is that kanan add, is that kanan add e? Oh no, it's a, if that is of course going to undermine fluency. That's got to be pretty automatic. Okay, so that's kind of the first stage. Now, what I showed you I do, which is say the sounds, they point to the sounds, say the syllables and they change it, and then make the syllables. This, half-hour reading a day, and spelling stimulate the word form area. And that's what I'm all about. If I can get that word form area stimulating, when they sound out the word reputation, they'll remember it next time. When I first get kids, they'll sound out crude, crude, and when they see it again, they sound it out again and again and again. That's because their word form area is not firing. By the way, when that's not happening, a sight word approach is a total waste of time. You can do a few, but a major dominant approach is a waste of time. I've seen it happen time and time again, and the kids don't remember the sight words because their word form area isn't working. So this is my goal, is to stimulate that. Once the word form area starts firing, we are in much better shape. So there are techniques I use to do that, okay? So let's look at something we do daily. Okay. Now this first is called pressure release. And then pressure release is different on the internet than it is with a book. With a book, a child will read, it's called the 2-2-2 technique, and you have this in your handout. When he struggles twice or she struggles twice, I take over for 2 sentences and leave out 2 words. So as the child's reading, let's go back to the beginning. The child's reading, Pep had just finished litanying. We point above to the word, and they will then correct it. Listening to a lecture in his Western philosophy class. This was a night class held at Georgetown School. We point above it and they'd say university. That's 2 struggles. Then what I would do is take over and the child would read with me and I pick up their pace. So if they're reading around 30 words a minute, I pick it up at around 50. So they'll read along with me. As a freshman, he had to take upper level classes, held it late, and I leave out a word and they fill it in times. Pep didn't mind the night and they'll fill in class. And then I turn it over to them and the child will take it over. So it's 2 sentences that they read. They're swinging below. And when they struggle, I don't have to point at it. So if they go, he liked walking and I walking and they're sounding it out, I don't have to point, but that's still a struggle. The reason it's a struggle is when a child who has reading problems is sounding out words and reading, they're burning sugar. And as you burn sugar, your arteries and veins kind of narrow down and you're starting to get less oxygen to your brain and you yawn a lot. You might have noticed that. The kids get exhausted. With pressure release, that doesn't happen because just as they make 2 struggles start to get exhausted, I take over and leave out 2 words. Okay? So the child goes back. It was a strange, I'd point above it and they'd go strange, October night, perfect for a 10 p.m. walk. The air was crisp, I'd point above it, crisp. Then I take over and the child reads with me. The sky was dark and the street lights lit up the rolling, they fill in the word, fog. Pep loved, I'll leave out this word, walking up the tree-lined cobblestone streets lined with townhouses of many colors. So, 2-2-2, okay? All right, I want you for 1 minute to rehearse that in your mind what that was before I move to the second technique. What the first one is. 2 what? Struggles. Now, that doesn't mean he got it wrong. He might be sounding it out. That's a struggle. Okay, so 2 struggles. Then the second 2. You take over for 2 sentences. Okay, and you leave out, the third 2 is you leave out 2 words. Often words, they sound it out to see if their word form area is starting to fire. Okay, that is called choral pressure release. Okay. Now, since I've gone to the internet, I've switched a lot on the internet to echo pressure release. And echo pressure release is where I am teaching. Let's go to another page here. It has, let's see. Looking for something with a little more punctuation. Okay. Good. So we'll start here. Now, with echo pressure release, when the child makes the second struggle, I take over and read, and then the child will echo and read. So the child will be going like this. From here, he could see the Washington, I'd point above, Washington, Memorial, I'd point above it, they'd go Memorial, Washington Memorial. Then I'd take over and I'd say echo drill. The White House and Georgetown University. I then come back and they say the White House and Georgetown University. Then I continue. Pep turned on his stereo and listened to the classical music as he watched the Washington landscape. Then they will read. Now notice we're getting smoother in the reading and I'm teaching them a little more about smoothness and fluency. But I'm also teaching punctuation. So if I'm echoing this, I'd be going, whoosh. Pep ducked is one of his CDs flew past his head. Whish, several more flew at him. So I discuss the use of punctuation, etc., as we're doing the echo drill. So I'll do 2 sentences with the echo drill, then they'll take over. Pep threw his keys at the pile of CDs next to the stereo. It knocked the CDs, I'd point above it, knocked. The CDs off the table, I'd point, and then I'd take over. Echo drill, and pull the plug to the stereo out of the socket. Then they go ahead and read it. So 2 forms, choral pressure release, which I do with the book, and then I kind of alternate choral with echo drill in a book. But on pretty much on the internet, I'm using the echo drill because there's not that time lag. And the more I do the echo, the more I like it. Okay, so we've talked about choral and echo. Take a moment and mentally rehearse those 2 different techniques. Okay. All right. Now, we talked about the word fluency here. We now want to move into passage fluency. We have a couple things, one called repeated reading and one is beat the clock. Now, repeated reading is where in our clinic, we do beat the clock as part of our session, and the parents are taught to do repeated readings. So let me tell you the difference. A repeated reading is a 1-minute timed reading where a child is timed and his scores are logged on a graph. So the date may be the 1st, and he read 30 words a minute. First times, they put a dot here with 2 errors. So we put 30 over 2 in the box. Then he gets 4 times to beat that. So his second time he reads 32 words a minute, we write that down on Scratch. Then he reads 40 words a minute, we write it down, then 42, and then maybe 50. So our second dot is at the 50 and no errors. So we had 30 with 2 and 50 with none. That's day 1. So then day 2 that night, we again take a different paragraph and do the same thing. This we ask the parents to do every night, and it's night and day in terms of the parents who do that and are vigilant and those who don't. And basically my view is you don't have to do it, but we'll probably need another 20 sessions of tutoring, which cost you more money. So I'd advise you to do this on a nightly basis. It's just going to save the child time and energy and you time and energy. Okay, so again, I also show this on my website, tattumreading.com, how to graph this if you need to look at how to do this and graph it. That and the beat the clock are demonstrated there. So again, let's say he reads 40 words a minute the first time with 2 errors. I'd put 40 over 2 here, click the 4. And then he does 4 readings. His second reading was the best of 60. I'll put 60 and he had 1 error. I'll put 60 over 1. So we'll have 2 graphs, the top number and the beginning number, the cold. So we have the cold number, which is the first, and then the hot. Now those should be going up as we're moving with the books. Now, since my books change grade level, as you move up a book, it'll often dip. The question is how much does it dip? If it dips significantly and he goes back to like 30 words a minute, a breakdown, we don't continue in that book. We move to a parallel book at a similar grade level and work on fluency. To be honest, though, generally we're making progress so that they catch up to where they were or get a little better on their fluency. But again, if they drop significantly, we will not move up grade level right away. We will work on fluency on a book at their grade level, okay, at that level. Now, my program, I have like 8 different books per concept. So if you're having a Our Family problem in that book, you can go to another Our Family book. There's other programs that do that as well. I don't care which series you use. You just go kind of lateral if there's a breakdown. Now, so that's done at night with the parents. We do it on Fridays, the clinician does it, so that we have our own record. Meanwhile, we do beat the clock every day with the kids, and kids love this. And what that is you're reading the text, and we'll pick out a paragraph, and we'll time the child for the paragraph. I just did it today with a kid, and his first time was like 48 seconds to do the paragraph. I said, great, let's beat 45. So his cold time was 48. Next time he did 43, I said, good, let's beat 40. He beat 40. Then I said, well, let's beat 35. He got 37. I said, let's beat 35. He got 33. And I said, okay, you didn't beat 30. And he reminded me, no, you said 35. So we quit. But he basically beat his time. And I've been doing this for years. And kids love it. They just don't get tired of it. So what both of these techniques are doing is, number one, they're getting you more frequent look at sight words. And also you're stimulating the word form area or the fusiform gyrus, which is what we want to do, both of those. So we do one of them during the class, and we have the parents do them afterwards. Okay?
Steve, we have a quick question, if that's
sure.
Okay. Hey, Celeste, would you like to ask your question? I just unmuted you.
Okay, hold on here. Let me. Hi. Oops, volume or microphone's off. I can't hear.
Yeah, hang on.
Hide non-video participants.
I'm having technical difficulties. Celeste, let me come back to you. Let me come back to you in the chat room. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. All right, if she can give you the question, then I can answer that. All right, so let's go back and review. First, fluency comes from rapid word attack. Okay, rapid speed of word attack. That's got to be automatic. Okay, all the phonics programs are based on that. Now, one of the differences in mine is I'm not interested in absolute correct word attack. It's word attack is approximation with context. I want them to start seeing larger units of reading as we go. Now, I work just as hard on getting the kid to sound out words as anyone else, but when they sound out a word like they call it habitual, I'll just quickly say, hey, they had a habit and it became habitual. What's that sound like? Oh, habitual. What I'm trying to do, word attack is really matching something that's already in their head, or it's not going to help. Word attack does not help if you don't have the language in your head. So what I'm trying to do is get them, as they're working out a word, to unlock words that are already in their head. That's why with ESL kids, it's harder for fluency, because the words aren't in their head. So what I have to do is teach vocabulary as we go, and that's fluency is much slower. I'm trying to learn Spanish now, and believe me, I am not fluent, and it just takes a lot of practice for me because of processing. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about a program that gets them to do advanced phonemic awareness, where they're moving in sounds, etc. And we do the repeated readings, and we're trying to stimulate the word form area, which is right here. So when you're sounding out words, it's here, Broca's area. And then right here, Wernicke's area, back here, says, I know that word. This is the language area. Sound it out, language, sound. And then what happens is that when kids, word form area fires, now when they read and they see it and it comes back to the occipital lobe, they don't have to come back up here and sound it out. They basically go right to the word form area and read the words. That happens as quick as seeing the word 2 to 3 times, which was shocking to me. But they figured the math. They said as many words as kids are learning, they are only seeing some words 2 or 3 times that it's going to the word form area. That's not happening with kids with severe auditory perception or dyslexia issues. That's why spelling is such a problem, and fluency is such a problem, and reading such a problem. Each year they're falling behind in that word form area. Okay? So my goal is to stimulate that. I use pressure release so that I can get them to read for like 25 minutes a day, and it's not a problem, any kid, through pressure release so that they don't burn out and start yawning the whole time. So we'll do pressure release. When I take over in pressure release, I pick up the pace. And there are some kids that word form area is firing. Their whole problem is they've never heard a fluent reader. So I tested this one child. She aced the phonics program. She was in 5th grade. Now, 5th grade, you should be, rule of thumb for average fluency, rule of thumb is add 20 words a year. So 1st grade, 70, 2nd is 90, 3rd is 110, 4th is 130, 5th is 150, then 170, 190, 210, 230, 250, 270. College is 350, professors are 500. That's just a rule of thumb, average, okay? She was reading at 70 words a minute. So she should be 70, 90, 110, 130, 150. She's reading half. So she read, then I read, and I doubled her pace. I picked up her pace. And then when I gave it back to her, she kept my pace. So I kept going at that pace, and she just kept the pace. I said, well, that's great knowing you. You're good to go. And she just hadn't heard a fluent reader. I've since found in the literature that that's not unusual. Now, there are kids that have linguistic patterns in their mind that make fluency easier for them. And we'll get into that when we talk about phrasing. It has something to do with what Chomsky talks about the innate language in our mind. And that is going to determine with a lot of kids how quickly they're going to pick up fluency, phrasing, or scooping, as Wilson calls it, okay? All right, so pressure release gets child reading, picking up their pace, repeated reading, stimulating that word form area, and helping pick up fluency, okay? Then at this point, I move into phrasing and double phrasing, okay?
Hey, Steve, can you answer a question for a second? Can you talk a little bit about kids who have hyperlexia?
Sure. 1 second. All right, just getting myself set up. Hyperlexia. All right, hyperlexia is the exact opposite of dyslexia. Dyslexia is more of a left hemisphere issue, and it has to do with processing through Broca and the temporal lobe. What's happening is that the right hemisphere is better developed than the left hemisphere. And Brock-Eide talks about it in his book, The Dyslexic Advantage, that they have many gifts, like the ability to manipulate objects in space, the ability to network, the ability to see patterns. That's right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is better developed. And so when they're reading, they will actually be stimulating the right hemisphere, and then it crosses back the corpus callosum when they're sounding out words. Very inefficient, okay. However, they're brilliant. 40% of them are your entrepreneurs, and many of our kids with dyslexia are just absolutely talented. Hyperlexics, they have the opposite issue. The right hemisphere isn't functioning very well, and they are very attuned at the phonological and syntactical areas of the brain, but break down at the semantic and pragmatic, the morphological parts of the brain that deals with higher language. So they'll sound out anything, read anything, but won't know what they're reading, okay? So some call it a surface dyslexia, but it's this problem with being able to sound out words and then understand meaning. It's a much more difficult process than teaching phonics, to be quite frank. Now, I've worked on a course for that, and it will be a course that's going to be offered as well as a systematic phonics course later on in May. But I spent many years working on this particular problem because their problems are manifest. They don't understand idioms. They have trouble with transition words. They don't know what pronouns do. There's things like that are issues. So completely different problem. Okay, great question. All right, let me get going. Okay. All right, so phrasing. You have a sheet on that basically goes into the steps of phrasing. It's concept 17, this is where we teach it. And that's phrase meaning, phrasing, student phrasing, independent phrasing. Those are the steps we take. So we will start.
It's not up yet, Steve.
It's what?
It's not up if you're trying to put it up.
Right. See it now?
Yes, there you go.
Okay. Okay, so we have phrase meaning, phrasing, student phrasing, independent phrasing. You have this on a handout. Now, phrase meaning is where I simply read a phrase. I talk about the phrases answer the questions who, what, where, when, why, or how. Okay? Then I will read a phrase, and I'm not fanatic on phrasing. In other words, I'm not obsessed. Get as close as you can, because when you're phrase reading, you're basically hitting things that make sense to you. So George, Dr. Ralph, George, and John, I'll say, what does that answer? And for younger kids, I'll say, is it a who or what? They'll say who. Went to the cave. What does that answer? Where or when? Where? To see. What? If they could find. Well, that's who and what. The raptor. That's who. They quietly climbed. That's what they did. And who? Up the cliffs. That's where. Until they saw. That's what? The huge dark cave. So we will spend, depending on the kids, with high school kids, that's just done in, I do all steps of phrasing in one day. But for younger kids, this may be a day or two of just talking about phrases answering the question. Okay, that's step one. Okay, then step two is I swing into phrases and we read. Now I've marked this because when I have a classroom, I pass this sheet out and they swing into that line for practice. Okay, that's why I've marked this. But anyway, we'll practice a little phrasing and the child will read with me. So I'll say, read with me. Are you ready? Dr. Ralph, George, and John went to the cave to see if they could find the raptor. I said, do you feel that flow? Okay. What's the raptor answering? The who or what? Good. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. What's they quietly climbed answering? Well, that's who or what, or how, actually. They approached the cave with a great deal of caution. So we'll practice reading phrases together, okay? All right. Now, at this point, if I have a group, I will pass out, I Xerox my book and mark the phrases for them to practice swinging, okay? And they will read in a whisper so I can move through the class and hear them phrasing. Dr. Ralph, George, and John went to the cave to see if they could find the raptor. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. Okay, so I'll listen to them while they're doing it. Okay, now when I tutor, I basically point to where the phrase ends and the child reads to my pencil. So the child would be swinging under, scooping, again is what Wilson calls it, I call it swinging. We swing under and the child would swing under Dr. Ralph, George, and John, and then I point to the next phrase. Went to the cave to see if they could find the raptor. And then after a couple sentences, I then model phrasing and they read with me. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. They approached the cave with a great deal of caution. Then I point for them and they phrase, okay? So this is a great technique. And it requires, I'm working with 2 kids on this now, and it requires a lot of vigilance. Some kids, their linguistic abilities are evident and their interior phrasing takes over. One kid was a kid called Matt I worked with in Michigan. He'd been in Orton for a couple years, was at what I call a start 4. He knew his short vowels, his consonants, his teams, his R family, his silent E, the diphthongs, and some 2 vowels go walking. I call them walkers. There's 7 of them that actually fit that way, or 8. But they know that. Okay. But he would read, and he would read like this. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. They approached the cave. He was reading word by word, sounding out. So I introduced the phrasing and pointed, and he swung and was doing unbelievably well as I point. He'd get it right away. So after we did it a bit, I lifted my marker, or pen, which is step 4, and he just went like this. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. They approached the cave with a great deal of caution as they entered it. In other words, the meaning of the phrase started to pull his word attack. He was reading 55 words a minute when he started. 15 minutes later, 110. The group thought it was a con. This was during a workshop. But it was just, I was as amazed as they were. And it was the fact that his processor, language processor, that Chomsky talks about, was simply stimulated, and he was picking out the phrases of what makes sense. I then taught him double phrasing. Double phrasing would be, Dr. Ralph, George, and John went to the cave to see if they could find the raptor. They quietly climbed up the cliffs until they saw the huge dark cave. They approached the cave with a great deal of caution. Double phrasing is really normal reading. And with double phrasing, sometimes you do double, sometimes you don't. So, and I haven't started that stage yet with the 2 kids I'm working with, because they're still not getting quite as fluent in picking out the phrases. Okay. So again, with the phrasing, I'm pointing, the child reads to my pencil, and then I take over and model, okay, with them reading with me, and then I turn it back to them and they read to my pen, okay? This again is shown in videos on tattumreading.com, phrasing, if you want to look at that, okay? Now, so we've got his word attack good. His worm fordham area is firing. He's doing pretty well on choro and echo pressure release. His beat the clock is getting faster and faster, and his timed readings are faster. And now he's phrasing and double phrasing. The next step is to make him a beach reader. And my business card is a beach, because that's my sole goal, is to make kids beach readers. Bring a book to the beach. So on LearnUp, I have a list of books or series that kids like for various ages that I try to hook them into, so they'll read a series. They'll get into the series and just read a lot, because that's the next step of fluency, is just reading a lot. You know, it's just like tennis. You practice just the technique of tennis, but you don't play tennis, you don't get any better. So you basically have to read a great deal. And that's what we're trying to do. So the next step is I will try to get kids hooked up in the series. I encourage parents, once we're done with our tutoring, to then continue to do some timed readings at night. Because we try to get children out of the clinic in 3 months, generally. Some 2, some 3 or 4, depending on their start. But get them up to grade level, close to fluency or above, and then out of the clinic. That's our goal. Now, in terms of my school, after they had the phonics program, they'd go to directed reading where we'd have vocabulary for them to break down. And then they would do guided reading, et cetera, in short stories initially, then books. But then the real fluency was the whole language, where they'd pick books, have conferences with books. We'd have book talks, et cetera. And kids loved it. I taught that with high school kids. Wonderful. Nancy Atwell is the master of that. But again, the mistake in whole language is that's not a method of reading. That is reading. It's not a method. Systematic phonics and directed readings are methods that lead up to it. Okay? Now, another thing I will do at the clinic, if I have a child who's made grade level reading but's not reading, I'll work an allowance system with the parents where a child who reads so much time can earn so much allowance during the week. Or they can work for a reward. One kid, there was a game he wanted to work for. And I don't care how I get them interacting with books as long as they're interacting. Now, somebody may say, well, you know, that's extrinsic reinforcement and it's going to get kids the wrong idea. They're not reading because they really love it. Archie Cohn, actually, Alfie Cohn, wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. Discuss that. One of the things he noted is that kids who went to art spontaneously when they received tokens or praise for it went less. That's because they didn't want to be manipulated. But if you hate art, you never go to art, and tokens get you there. And as a result of doing art, you now like it. That's the correct use of reinforcement. Well, I found kids who couldn't read, who through this reinforcement became readers. So I will work with parents on a reward system if we need to. Okay. All right. Now, we then move to silent reading. And there are programs for silent reading like Jamestown Press, which has really, a lot of their stuff now is on Amazon. They have the best comprehension books, I think, which I'll talk about when I do the comprehension workshop. And I get them from Amazon. I just got 8 of them this week that I ordered. There's the ACE 1-minute readings. So you just go to ACE 1-minute readings and it'll time you for them. It'll time you. So it's more than a minute, but it'll time you and get words per minute and comprehension. It takes a couple minutes for that test and that's free. You can do that regularly. And then there are timed fluency books, a whole slew of them that work on timed fluency for silent reading. And those are all good approaches, okay? Let me pause here to see if there's some more questions before I move on.
Yeah, Steve, there's one question. Do you have suggestions for dealing with a kid who misses small function words or substitutes them and drops suffixes? Well, Ed.
Yeah. The reason kids miss the small words is that kids, unfortunately, are being taught the 3Q system through our reading system now, which is totally an inept way of doing word attack. It's based on the context of the word, some phonics. It's not taught directly. They learn a little scattering of phonics and syntax, and they're taught to guess words. Well, it's hard to guess little words because they don't have meaning. So they're used to skipping over the little words or just making them up because there's no context to it. So when a child does do that, when I use pressure release, I point to the word above it to tell, so that he has to go back and read that. So if he's missing it, like if I'm doing pressure release, I'll point above where he missed it, and I'll point out the little words. I had a child who missed it. Now, one of the kids that was missing the little words, I had to get him out of the book, go to Kindle and enlarge the print, and that ended that problem. And I'll have him look for glasses, but it was amazing. As soon as I enlarged the print, the problem went away. Also, echo drill by focusing on that is helpful. There was a second component to that. Oh, the suffixes. That hasn't been quite as big an issue, but it's handled like I do everything. I just point to the word, they make a mistake. So if they said they were jumped to the building, I point to the word, which means sound it out and what makes sense, and they'll see the suffix. I also work on suffixes daily. So it hasn't been a major issue like pronouns. Great question.
So
What
Steve,
else?
I have a longer question here.
I know
We work with many students that exhibit difficulty with acquiring automatic reading and spelling skills. We use both Hasbrook and Tyndall norms for oral reading fluency assessments and Wilson's Foundation guidelines for assessing word, phrase, and passage reading skills. Some students exhibit notable attending difficulties, and others have documented word retrieval, working memory, and/or fluency cognitive deficits. Can you please address the aspects of fluency skill development for students who have language-based challenges and/or cognitive deficits, and how that will impact our decisions to maintain instructional focus at a specific level versus moving forward and accepting a lower level of automaticity?
Okay.
Will the age of the student impact those decisions?
The start will. What start they are impacts the decisions. Because I've had first graders at start 5 and who could read Harry Potter. Inappropriate. They should be reading good first, second grade books, third grade books. But their word form area is firing. The word form area is the key to all this, because a child who has difficulty with the word form area, those are the children that are 2.5% of the population that are called saying they have severe dyslexia. And with those kids, their processing is slowed down. And one of the kids I worked with in Michigan was a start 2 at age 5. He was told he'd be illiterate for life. We got him reading at around 8th grade level, reading about 90 words a minute, 80, 90. I tried phrasing with him on 5 occasions, but here's my rule for phrasing. If I start phrasing and kids start guessing at words or missing and sounding out, I go back and I'd keep going back with him. But he understands what he reads and he's a thorough reader. So reading is getting meaning from print. That's my main issue. So the key issue is the kid understanding what he's reading. He can always listen to books at a faster speed if he's interested to be in a hurry. Okay. So my number one goal is that. Now I mentioned is I'm pushing grade level. If the fluency stalls, he's at 30 words a minute, 40, 50 as I'm going up in grade level. Then he's at a book and goes back to 30. We do not move up. We move across to a book at similar grade level, work on fluency, then move up. Okay? But I'm always going as fast as I can, as slow as you must. And you might note that probably my air is going too fast, but that's the brakes. So now, children that are low cognitive, we do know that children that have Down syndrome can learn phonics well and can learn to read. Their problem is they don't understand what they read. So that's what my comprehension program is trying to address, is the subsets of comprehension, which involve, vocabulary, idioms, background, sentence structure, pronoun usage, the types of gist statements, and then the basic comprehension skills of inferring, et cetera, et cetera. It's more involved, the comprehension program. And there are some kids that just are not going to be able to understand high level stuff. It's life. So yeah, your approach with that kid is more understanding and meaning and trying to get the highest level of reading material you can that they enjoy. Now with the other kids, if their word form area is firing, like I said, at the clinic, I'll suspect the child's word form area is firing. They're reading at first grade. They're a start 2, but they can spell laugh. And, and they'll spell catch. They'll understand the TCH or fudge. And they'll remember some words when I do the 3-minute informal reading test that they shouldn't. And I'll tell the teacher, I think the word form area is firing, push them. And what'll happen is that word form area will fire and they run through our books and their fluency goes above grade level, and it's a phenomenon, and it's nothing we're doing that's great. It's simply we recognize it and we push it. So we look like miracle workers with that kid. And it's really that he or she wasn't taught phonics correctly and couldn't utilize the skills. This happens a lot in low socioeconomic areas in Detroit. A lot of these kids are start twos, they can't read, but their word form area is fine. Their language is okay. And they get in the program and really zoom much further than our severe kids who are in high socioeconomic groups because that word form area is fine. So I look for that, but I'm pretty realistic. My goal is to make the child literate, to try push to fluency as best I can. If I get them to grade level and we're not beyond that fluency and we're stalled, I will set the parents up on repeated reading program and try to get them in reading series. I don't know if that answers your whole question. If not, quick shoot another one. I'll answer it. Anything else, Steve?
Yeah, so there's another question. How do you teach prefixes and suffixes? Can you do that really quickly, Steve? We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay. Well, the backside of my board has prefixes, roots, and endings. And I start by just having them say these endings because in their mind, they have the word vacation. They just don't know what this is, or they have the word mission. So I want them just to be able to read and recognize these, and we play with big words where they do it. And then later on, towards the end of the program, we start adding meaning and add roots and endings, okay?
As their reading improves, is it typical that their spelling continues to be weak?
Oh, spelling, yeah. Well, here's the deal. If the word form area is not firing and they don't learn to spell to 4th, 5th grade, they're learning primarily the phonetic spell, and they're like 4,000 or 5,000 words behind at least in spelling. So it's never gonna really catch up unless their word form area is firing and they weren't taught well and they take off and their word form area logs in 2 or 3 words when they read. That can happen. But generally with kids with dyslexia, their spelling will be lag behind. So I try to get them to be good enough spellers for notes, writing checks, writing short summaries at school, etc. But I work very strongly on speech dictation because it's so good now. And so with my students, I work on how to speak into the microphone and how to use your pace, then how to correct right after you do a sentence, how to self-correct and move through there. My older kids, I work a lot on that kind of thing. But younger kids, we're still working spelling, but if you get them later on, it just won't catch up unless their word form area has been firing.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between working with an individual student and a group setting?
Yeah,
With the techniques?
much easier. Put it that way. Because you can individualize and go as fast as you can, as slow as you want. The problem with a group is you might have, can you see my starts here, Steve? No?
Not yet, not yet.
All right, I'll finish with this. In that group, you may have a start 2 who's at consonant short vowels, a start 3 that's ready for 2-syllable words, a start 4 that can read, but isn't fluid and has gaps with some vowel teams, and a start 5. That's a problem. What do you get then? 3 groups, 4 groups? How much time do you got? An hour and 20 minutes? How much do you get per group? You have to be awful talented to do that. So it's problematic. So what you have to do, and if you have that, and an elementary school in Michigan did it, is for reading, they break them up into their starts. And they'd go to their start group, get going, and they'd come back to the class. So it's like taking an elective. You went to your very start and you come back. Schools kind of have to sort that out. But yeah, teaching a group is harder because you have classroom management. And the one who asked about ADHD, that's a common problem. Because reading problem tires you out because your word form area and your processing is exhausted. You yawn a lot and you're tired, so you need breaks. Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about kids who show up with multiple learning differences or multiple assessments in ADD, dysgraphia, memory delay? How does your system work with these kids?
All that fits under reading problems for I find the kids with dyslexia, of course, have memory problems for syntax, phonology, and often syntax written, not for concepts. But of course, they have problems. Since they get exhausted, they'll often have ADHD issues. Then you have ADHD kids who couldn't read because they couldn't sit still. That's another game. We use a block system where kids that have those issues earn a block. We have a lesson has 6 parts, and they earn a block for each 6 parts. And we'll pick up the pace, and when they're finished with the 6 blocks, they'll leave early. This is for the severe kid. So they can see, hey, I'm out of here. Or we will, after 2 blocks, do a quick game. After the next 2, another game, and then they leave when they're done. We'll do various things to try to motivate them. And the blocks are simply 6 blocks on a table that when a child earns it, we push them. I don't have the child do it because he'll play with them. I have him over to the side and I move the block up. By the way, if he screws around when I move it up, I move it halfway down until he's back on task, and then I'll move it back up. Okay? Other questions?
So I think that's the only questions I have that are
Great.
left. I'm going to ask people if they would like to. They can certainly send me an email at LearnUpCenters, Steve Hagel, learnupcenters.org, and we'll get an answer for you. Do you have a quick question on, do you recommend Lexia Core or other computer programs which are used in our schools? Do you see that as being helpful?
It can be if the child's highly motivated and sees the benefit of it. The problem is there's not a lot of personal, I'm finding the personal connection is 50% of the success of our program, because the kids have poor self-esteem, feel unsuccessful, etc. Plus, I don't care how motivating games are, these programs get old pretty quickly. So, but they can be used. They're most helpful where you're doing hands-on lessons and then they reinforce it with the computer and it's checked. But just as a sole curriculum, you know, I just don't think that's the answer.
Great.
Okay, so just a reminder, next week is diagnosing reading and developmental problems and comprehension in a half hour. And we're going to be setting up courses in both phonics and comprehension. Thank you.
And I just wanted to let you know that LearnUp Centers is up and running online. We are tutoring remotely. We do our assessments remotely. We do a videotape, and then we do an assessment so you can figure out what start the student is, and then we can provide a program for them if that's something you'd like to do. We also do trainings. We will be doing a training in May in addition to these webinars. So look out for more information on that. And if you would, we do send out a survey to see how these webinars are going. They help us design them. Please let us know what you're thinking, what we can do to improve, and how we can help you teach kids to read. Because at the end of the day, no matter what program you're using, we're all trying to get kids to read, because that is the key to all success in academics and in careers. So thank you very much for attending, Steve. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, and we'll see you next week.
Great.